Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, traders are gearing up for a week of political risks and inflation data as we close out the first half of 2024. Investors will be closely monitoring the first U.S. presidential debate, while the first round of voting in the French legislative election is set to take place this weekend. As for the inflation data, that comes Friday with the Federal Reserve's preferred gauge of consumer prices, the PCE deflator. Nancy Tangler, CEO at Laffer Tangler Investments, still thinks earnings is the key.
You know, I think you ignore at this point what the Fed is saying, what data they're depending on this next meeting, because the trend line in corporate earnings is positive and margins are expanding. Now, not every company. We saw it last quarter. If you missed on any metric, you got clobbered.
Nancy Tangler of Laffer Tangler Investments notes the S&P 500 has risen 3 weeks in a row.
Well, Nathan, the stock bull run may have very little upside. That's the conclusion of our latest Bloomberg survey, and we get the details from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
The 2024 rally has driven the S&P 500 to 31 record-closing highs. And according to the latest Bloomberg Markets Live Pulse survey of almost 600 respondents, that has left the asset class more overpriced than U.S. credit or gold. Investors aren't looking to hit the sell button just yet, but signs of skittishness are evident as about half of survey takers say stocks will see the beginning of a correction of at least % this year. 35% say that will happen in 2025. Artificial intelligence, a key driver of the market's almost 15% advance this year, is seen as the most likely trigger for a sell-off. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Jeff, thanks. We'll have inflation data at the end of the week. The other key event for investors and voters comes this Thursday night. That's when President Biden and former President Trump meet for their first debate, hosted by CNN. Senator Elizabeth Warren is on the Biden campaign's National Advisory Board. She says the debate will draw a clear contrast.
If Donald Trump is elected to the presidency, he and the extremist Republicans are coming after abortion, contraception, and IVF in every single state in this country.
Senator Warren spoke on ABC's This Week. The 90-minute debate will include no audience. The candidates' microphones will be turned off when it's not their turn to speak. Republican Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota was asked on NBC's Meet the Press if former President Trump will be able to back off personal insults.
You know, I don't think that he has to talk about get personal in this debate at all, because he's going to have so many good things to talk about in contrast with Joe Biden's policies.
Meet the Press and This Week can be heard every Sunday on Bloomberg Radio, and you can hear the CNN debate on Bloomberg Radio or watch it on Bloomberg Television. Our coverage starts Thursday night with a special edition of Bloomberg Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines. Starts at 8 p.m. Wall Street time.
Well, Nathan, now to the elections in France. Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally has made further gains ahead of the first round of France's snap legislative election on Sunday. According to Bloomberg's poll of polls, the party has increased its lead by 0.3 points to 34.2%. President Emmanuel Macron dissolved the lower house of parliament earlier this month and called the snap legislative vote after his group was trounced in European Parliament elections.
Let's turn now, Karen, to the latest on the war in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says intense fighting in Gaza will come to an end shortly. In his first major interview with an Israeli media outlet since the October 7th Hamas attacks, Netanyahu also directly rejected the prospect of a ceasefire deal with Hamas that could eventually lead to the end of the war. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the latest.
PM Benjamin Netanyahu is now saying that intense operations in Gaza will end very soon. He says the next step will be to get some troops into the north to counter Hezbollah aggressions and to bring some local residents back from where they were evacuated. He says he wants to do it by diplomatic means, but if not, he'll go another way. Meanwhile, he's sending Foreign Minister Yoav Gallant to the U.S. to talk about additional aid, which he says has been slowed down. The U.S. has consistently denied the allegation. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. In company news, federal prosecutors have, according to Reuters, recommended Boeing face criminal charges, and shares are down 0.2% this morning. We get details from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The charges would stem from violating a deferred prosecution agreement. It was put in place in 2021 after two 737 MAX fatal crashes. In May, the DOJ determined Boeing breached the agreement. The company disagreed. Now, senior Justice Department officials have received a recommendation to bring criminal charges. The question is, will they, and if so, what type? They could extend beyond the original 2021 fraud conspiracy charge. Alternatively, instead of prosecuting Boeing, the DOJ could extend the 2021 settlement by a year or propose new, stricter terms. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. Apple has been hit with a formal warning from European Union antitrust enforcers for allegedly stifling competition on its App Store. The European Commission says Apple must allow app developers to steer users to cheaper deals and offers outside of the App Store. The new order comes under the EU's Digital Markets Act, which lays out a raft of do's and don'ts for some of the world's largest tech platforms. Today's announcement is a preliminary step. It follows a similar move the EU made against Apple in March, which came with a $1.9 billion penalty.
Well, Nathan, Bloomberg News has learned ByteDance and Broadcom are in talks to develop an advanced artificial intelligence chip. Sources say the U.S. chip designer and Beijing-based ByteDance have talked about a 5-nanometer purpose-built chip. No deal has yet been reached between the two companies, and Broadcom already supplies an older generation processor for use in ByteDance's data centers.
Finally, Karen, there were several arrests on the 18th green at the PGA's Travelers Championship yesterday. 6 climate protesters stormed the green with smoke bombs as the leaders lined up to putt. Each of those protesters was charged with first-degree mischief, first-degree criminal trespass, and breach of peace. The world's top golfer, Scottie Scheffler, says he was trying not to lose focus.
When something like that happens, you don't really know what's happening, so it can kind of rattle you a little bit just because there's people running around the green and there's police officers running around the green, and you don't know if they're peaceful. You don't know what they're doing. You have no idea what's going on, and so it can be a bit stressful. But fortunately, I was out there, and you could kind of see me and Akshay talking to each other for a minute, me and Tom talking to each other for a minute, just basically trying to calm down.
And Scottie Scheffler did calm down. He shrugged off the protest to win the Travelers Championship on the first hole of sudden death, narrowly edging out Tom Kim. Scheffler closed the weekend at 22 under to secure his 6th win of the year, the most in one season on the PGA Tour since Tiger Woods' 6 victories in 2009. It's also the most before July since Arnold Palmer won 6 in 1962.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Officials warn beachgoers beware that there is a high risk of rip currents along the eastern and Gulf Coast, with several drownings reported from Florida to New York. Beaches in Long Island and New Jersey all the way down to North Carolina and Florida at high risk. The heightened alerts coming as authorities called off the search for 2 teenage boys ages 16 and 17 who went missing near Jacob Riis Park in Queens on Friday. NYPD Deputy Commissioner Kaz Daughtry.
The wave was extremely high, and it went on top of them and sucked them over.
Witnesses say the teens were swept away shortly after lifeguards went off duty. The NYPD is in high alert following the latest attacks abroad. Russian authorities say more than 15 police officers and several civilians, including an Orthodox priest, have been killed by armed militants in the Southern Republic of Dagestan. They say the gunmen opened fire on 2 Orthodox churches, a synagogue, and a police post in 2 cities Sunday. Russia's National Anti-Terrorist Committee described the attacks in the predominantly Muslim region with a history of armed militancy as terrorist acts. Police say they have killed at least 6 of the attackers. Today, Tuesday, and Wednesday are declared days of mourning in the region. The death toll has climbed to 4 in Friday's random mass shooting at a grocery store in Arkansas. State police say a 23-year-old who was a nurse died Sunday. Callie Weems was rendering aid when she was fatally shot in Fordyce. Her mother, Helen Browning.
She loved God. She loved her daughter. She loved her family. And she loved people.
Police say the suspect who was arrested was armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, a pistol, and extra shotgun rounds. Authorities identified the other 3 victims killed: 81-year-old Ellen Shrum, 62-year-old Shirley Taylor, and 50-year-old Roy Sturgis. Rochester police say 6 people were shot at a city park early Sunday morning, and 1 officer was injured responding to the scene. Officers responded to the sound of gunshots at MLK Park after the park had closed for the night. Rochester Police Chief David Smith says an officer was injured in a fight with someone at the scene.
While continuing to work to disperse the crowd and provide treatment to the victims, 38-year-old Joshua Sanchez actively blocked the officers and then began to fight with officers.
Chief Smith says it looks like they were all part of the same gathering. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Mets and Yankees start a mini 2-game Subway Series tomorrow night, Citi Field. It's the Mets that are hot. The Yanks are not. Mets have won 9 of the last 11. Yanks have lost 6 of 8. They've lost their last 3 series, before which they had only dropped 3 series all season. At the stadium, Atlanta won 3-1. The Yankees have acquired J.D. Davis in a trade with Oakland, so they add an ex-Met. The Mets that really last night had an ex-Yankee on the mound, and Luis Severino was outstanding. 7 scoreless innings, he allowed only 3 hits, struck out 10. Mets beat the Cubs 5-2. Edwin Diaz came on to pitch the 9th inning. The umpires, as they always do, looked at his hand, and the ump later said it was extremely sticky. Diaz got tossed. He may be looking at a 10-game suspension. Red Sox won 7-4 in Cincinnati. They won 7 of 8. Nationals won 2-1 at Colorado. The Orioles got swept in Houston. The Giants got swept by the Cardinals. In Omaha, Tennessee beat Texas A&M. So the College World Series will be decided tonight, as will the Stanley Cup. Can Edmonton do something not done in 82 years, win the final series after losing the first 3 games? Here's the Oilers' Leon Draisaitl.
It's been a hell of a story so far, but at the end of the day, we play to win, right? And this is going to be the hardest game for us. And they're going to come out hard. They're going to play at home. We have to bring our game again.
It would be the Oilers' first cup since 1990, the first for any Canadian team since Montreal in 93. Florida with a now 4th chance to win the cup for the first time. WNBA, Chicago came from 15 down, beat Indiana by a point in the Battle of the Rookies. Caitlin Clark bested by Angel Reese. She had 25 points, 16 rebounds. Tennis in England, Tommy Paul won the Queen's Club Wimbledon tune-up. He becomes the highest-ranked American player. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager, and we are heading into the final trading week of the first half of 2024 with some of the key catalysts stacked right at the end of it. Got a presidential debate Thursday night, the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation on Friday, and that could inform the central bank's next policy decision near the start of the second half of 2024. Joining us for more, Bloomberg radio and television anchor Kriti Gupta. Kriti, good morning. On top of all those catalysts, we have political risk in Europe, the French election starting this weekend, a UK election the week after that. Is there a read-through from Europe's political volatility to what we could see in the U.S. market?
There is absolutely a read-through. And I think the mistake that a lot of folks make is saying it's on the other side of the Atlantic. We don't care. Let me explain to you why we do. There is a read-through specifically into the Treasury market, into the dollar, arguably into the stock market as well. Now, I think a lot of eyes this week in particular from a political perspective is going to be that highly anticipated debate from President Biden and former President Trump as well, talking about tariffs, talking about immigration, talking about things like how they may be tackling this looming deficit. The first thing on the new president's agenda will, of course, be the budget ceiling. It comes up January 2025. That being said, the read-through from Europe is really important because it's coming off of not just political turmoil in France, simply this kind of rise of the far right, this rise of the far left as well, that's going to create a bigger deficit in France, but it also creates a lot of pressure on the bond market in Europe as well. Now, the reason this matters to an American audience is simply because when we've seen iterations of this in the past, take a look at the 2011, 2013 through 2013 sovereign debt crisis in Europe. Take a look at the mini budget coming out of Liz Truss as recently as a couple years ago. You do start to see a read through into the U.S. bond market. So read through, that contagion effect is what we're expecting to see.
Do you expect bond investors to position in some way around the presidential debate? Does that have the potential to be a market mover depending on the kinds of policy discussion that we see on Thursday night?
Debates traditionally aren't tradable. And yet this morning you hear a lot of folks out of Europe saying, I'm going to stay up and watch it. It's about 2 a.m. London time. I'll certainly be staying up and watching it as well. It's important to keep in mind that the tariff policy is important, not just because it's between the U.S. and China, but between U.S. and China. The tension creates ASML, for example, based out in the Netherlands, is stuck in the middle of the sanctions talk. EU tariffs being put on Chinese EVs, being accused of jumping on the market. That's really important as well. When that all factors into what kind of lead the next president, whether it's Biden or Trump, the takeaway is they're going to be tough on China. Just how tough is the real question.
Yeah, and that toughness on China plays into a lot of what we're seeing in the tech sector, this rally around the AI play. But we did have a drop in tech shares at the end of last week, and that could fuel the debate, I think, about whether this tech rally's topped out.
It does, and it also fuels the debate, of where the next AI leg is coming from. Remember, this is something that China is also really investing on when it comes to things like electrification as well, applying AI, their own chip technology as well. I believe over the weekend some headlines coming as well on ByteDance and Broadcom working with TSMC when it comes to creating their own chip. So there is really the story of what kind of China read-through is on Taiwan as well, and that's all going to come up in the debate.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.